Okay, so there's a lot of front matter here, so we'll go ahead and get started just to make sure we have time for all our speakers that we're lucky to have joining us here today. I want to welcome everyone to this session. Thank you for joining. Thanks for attending. We've seen a lot of the same people in a lot of the sessions over this two-day conference, and we appreciate everyone's support. And we're glad that there's a lot of interest in these topics. And I just want to remind people, if you're not already a member of Preservation Delaware, I really encourage you to join us. Make a donation, join the organization, and get more involved. And there's lots of ways to do that. I wanted to thank our sponsors. If Tim can put that slide up, that would be fantastic. We had a record number of sponsors for this year's conference, and it enabled some great events tonight, which is another thing I want to call people's attention to. It's the generous support of the sponsors that helped make that possible. This evening, rather than watching a rerun of Wheel of Fortune, come on out tonight and check out a really cool historic mill and network with some other people of like mind who are into historic preservation and Delaware history. You won't regret it, I'm sure that. And there's wine and cheese I think I saw on there, so lots to look forward to tonight. And I wanted to while we're doing thank yous, thank Alex Tarantino, who has done an amazing amount of work behind the scenes, really a unsung hero putting this conference together, and the amount of work that this requires is huge. And it seems like it's a fairly simple thing, but organizing all these panels, coordinating with so many speakers, sharing so much information. She's worked for months to make this conference happen. I just want to make sure Alex gets the credit she deserves for all that hard work as our education chair. And also Tim Pancoast, who has been working mostly behind the scenes on registration and technology and stuff. And so thank you, Tim, for all your hard work. As for me, I am the moderator for today's session. My name is Michael Emmons. I'm the Vice President of Newcastle County for Preservation Delaware, and I'm also an architectural historian at the Center for Historic Architecture and Design at University of Delaware, which is often called CHAD for short. I'm really excited to moderate this panel on historic preservation funding opportunities. I've been in the historic preservation field for about 15 years wearing various hats, and this is easily the number one question that comes up from all kinds of quarters and all kinds of constituencies. Is where can we find more financial support to promote historic preservation efforts? And so this is an exciting panel to be moderating, and I'm so glad we have all these panelists joining us to share their programs, because this is something that's really important. Just like having good parks or good infrastructure, I truly believe that historic preservation is a communal good and we need more of it. And so I'm really glad that we have so many people here to present lots of different funding opportunities for both property owners and organizations doing historic preservation work. We're lucky to have several presenters from different key organizations in the country to share their programs that help fund historic preservation projects of various sorts and in various ways. And these include Megan Brown from the National Park Service and Catherine Carey from MPS, who I think is also here to help answer questions about those programs, Nikki Vann from the National Trust for Historic Preservation, Jeremy Rothwell from Delaware Preservation Fund, and both Kara Briggs and Emily Whaley from the Delaware Division of Historical and Cultural Affairs, which is of course our state historical preservation office. So I'll do a brief introduction of each speaker as I introduce them, but please check out their full bios in the chat. I think that we'll be presenting lots of things in the chat for you to check out, including a link to the full bios of our presenters. But we didn't want to go over the full bios just to save plenty of time for their presentations. Some quick housekeeping. So we will take all questions at the end of the presentations. So they'll all give their presentations and then we'll open things up at the end of the session for a Q&A. So please submit any questions you have using that Q&A button, which for many will be somewhere towards the bottom right of your screen. Also, there's a chat function available if you need to get in touch with us for any kind of technical difficulties or have something you want to share. That's also at the bottom of the screen. Please note this preservation is being recorded and will be available in a few weeks on the Preservation Delaware's YouTube channel. Lots of good stuff starting to build up on that Preservation Delaware YouTube channel from both conferences and webinars and seminars that Preservation Delaware has done. So please check that out as well. And again, if you aren't already a member of Preservation Delaware, please consider joining or donating. And it would be great even to get people involved. If you'd like to be more involved, we would love to have you. So with that, I think I will turn it over soon to Megan Brown, our first speaker. And Megan, if you want to go ahead and share your screen and start getting set up while I introduce you, feel free. So Megan has worked at the National Park Service for 19 years, starting as a grants management specialist, and then spending 10 years as a certified local government coordinator. And she now serves as the chief of state, tribal, local plans and grants division, STLPG, at the National Park Service. Her education includes a bachelor in architecture from Auburn University and a master in historic preservation from the University of South Carolina. And so with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Megan. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Michael. Hopefully everyone can see and hear, and we'll get started. Happy to be with y'all. I think it's afternoon. I'm not sure at this point in the week. But we're going to talk today about the grant programs available through the National Park Service. And those mainly come out of our division, which is the state, tribal, local plans and grants. It's very long, so we shorten it up and call it Steel Pig. And we embrace the pig part. So if you don't remember anything else from today, remember the pigs, and that's where you find the money. So that's how that works out. Really, our division's role is to manage the Federal Preservation Partnership Program. And that includes our working with our state historic preservation offices, tribal historic preservation office, certified local governments, and of course the public, and our nonprofit partners are included in all of that, like Preservation Delaware. So this is one of the, I think, the unique places that a lot of governments and entities work together. And the main way that we support this partnership is through grant awards from the Historic Preservation Fund. And the Historic Preservation Fund, in case you don't know, is funded by offshore oil and lease gas revenues. So the idea being that the destruction of some resources, part of that funding is put back into the conservation of others. So it funds a lot of funds, actually, not just the HPF, as we call it, but also Land and Water Conservation Fund and those types of things. We're in a unique position right now of this is the most funding we've ever received for the Historic Preservation Fund. We actually finally crossed the $150 million threshold, as well as the most number of grant programs. So I don't know how long it'll last. This is definitely, the money's growing on trees right now. So I hope all of you will think about applying and take advantage of the resources that are available right now, because they don't always stay there. So, so let's talk more about the fund itself. It's really broken into two sections. We have our non-competitive grant programs and then our competitive programs. And we'll spend a lot of time talking about those competitive programs in a little bit, but I wanted you to know about the non-competitive side. And that's what funds our state and tribal historic preservation offices. Every year we give them a block grant, help support their staff. In exchange for doing that, they run federal programs for us. So that's why the state or the tribal office might be your first point of contact for a National Register application or a certified local government program, or the tax incentives, those types of things. So in exchange for that funding, they do take on responsibilities for us and manage those. Then if they have other programs they want to work on, they can. So it's a bit of flexibility. Every state office and tribal office is a little bit different. We do give a lot more funding out to our state offices. So they have a little bit more of a robust role in managing those programs and usually more staff. Our tribal offices, we're up to 212 now, I believe. They get a smaller amount of funding. So usually we're just funding a staff person in those offices. But the key to this is 10% of that funding goes to certified local governments from the states, and that has to go to CLGs, as we call them. And if it doesn't go there and get spent, then we can take it back. So that's an important piece. And so you know that if you are a CLG, that at least about 5 to 6 million is now running through your state for you to apply for. And how do you know if you're a CLG? Well, hopefully you know. If you don't, you can look it up on our website. And this was just a map example from Florida. And we've got coordinator contact information. Of course, you have a state CLG coordinator in every state office. So that's important to know about and contact them. And then we also have a kind of fun application, our CLG Gateway app that we've produced that shows the crossover between national parks and our certified local governments, as well as other federal land entities. So Do check that out. And I'm happy to provide a copy of these slides to share out so that y'all have access to all the information as well. So let's just touch a little bit on those CLG projects that we can fund, give you hopefully some ideas for things in your communities. We always like to engage with youth and convince them that preservation and history are very cool early. So this is an example of an activity book that was done in Alabama. Surveys are a big thing that we fund. It's always important to know what you have so that you're able to save it, even if it's modern resources. So this is an example of 2 surveys in Oklahoma, one doing Route 66 architecture, which is fairly modern, as well as mid-century modern housing in Enid, Oklahoma. So survey is never finished. We've always got to go back and look for new resources. Part of the reason survey is so expensive too, is disasters. And we're all seeing an increase in this across the country. This is an example from Colorado, who had a disaster in a forest fire and had not surveyed their cultural resources, didn't quite know where to send those immediate resources when they come in, when FEMA comes to your town. So after the fire, they did a survey, and then was hit with flooding. And because they had done that survey, they knew where to direct those really important resources. So that's a good reason to do survey, and CLG program is a great place to get that funding. Our certified local governments get involved in a lot of things too, and this is how one got involved in Section 106 review. So if you're not familiar with 106, it's that part of the National Historic Preservation Act that talks about consultation, and it's a way for preservation partners to get involved. And this was actually a lifting of a historic bridge that DOT didn't want anymore, a familiar story, over to be the entry of their new state park. And it was done with a training exercise with Chinook helicopters. So kind of exciting, made TV, and a good, wonderful reuse of the bridge. If you don't know what to do next with some CLG funding, we have a library of examples. We have over 3,000 good projects that we have funded with the Historic Preservation Fund in our IRMA system. So this is a great place to check things out. If you're wanting to do a project like design guidelines, heritage tourism planning, those types of things, there's some really good examples in here. And that may help you talk to your consultant that you're hiring more about what you want that project to be. So let's talk about the competitive side of the funds. And we've really had a shift in these funds since 2014 towards the funding of underrepresented communities. And these are the 8 programs that we have available right now. And it's good timing for you because a lot of them are currently up and able to be applied for. We don't know about 2023 funding yet. What we're giving away right now is 2022 funding. So we'll have to wait and see what Congress gives us in the budget for 2023 and next year. But so far they've been pretty supportive. So I would hope that we would see several of these programs funded again. Like I said, we've kind of moved away from just funding the founding fathers' houses and things like that, and shifting to telling all American stories. So these are just examples of some of the communities that we've been funding with since 2014. So a nice mix of all the parts and pieces of our American culture. And just to show how that's affecting things, this is the growth in African American listings in the National Register that we've been able to support with the grant fund. So although it's only 7%, that's a big increase from 1%. So we're excited to see that diversification taking place. So the program that really got that kicked off and started was our underrepresented community program. And it's focused on survey and listing in the National Register. So a great place to start if you want to find out where your diverse resources are. This is an example from Oregon. Portland, Oregon surveyed their LGBTQ resources. We are waiting to see about funding for this for 2023, but keep an eye on it. It is available to our state, tribal, and CLG partners. So it's good to be a CLG. You can apply for this program. Our African American Civil Rights is the program that came next, 2016. This program has expanded past just civil rights era, that 20th century piece we think about, and now tells the story from everything from transatlantic slave trade forward. Does 2 types of things, does physical preservation of historic buildings. This is 16th Street Baptist Church, where the bombing site where the young girls were killed. Also history projects. So that can include everything from surveys and nominations to education, oral histories. We even have opened it up to preserve civil rights collections. So if you have an association there, please keep that in mind. Sites need to be eligible for the National Register or already listed. And that listing needs to be about civil rights. So if your project's not already listed or doesn't include that Civil Rights Association, we will ask you to amend that nomination as part of the project and update that documentation. Another way that we're diversifying the National Register. It's a growing program. It's open right now. There is no match required. And we have about 21 million, 22 million to give away this year. So those applications are due soon in a couple weeks, but I encourage you to look at that if you're interested. An outgrowth of that program is our History of Equal Rights program, a little bit smaller, so it just focuses on physical preservation, but we can do some pre-preservation planning, construction documents, things like that. Those just closed, so we'll be looking to see if we get funding for that for 2023, and hopefully we will. But this seeks to tell the story of the struggle for all Americans to gain equal rights. So it could be women, LGBTQ, African American, Asian American, Latino, all of those. So another option for physical preservation funding. Our HBCU program has been around for quite a while. I know you have these in Delaware. So this does physical preservation work, but we've also opened it up to do planning. So preservation plans and National Register nominations for HBCU campuses are an option. These applications will be available. I think they're actually up now, sorry, and they're due in January. So if you are working with an HBCU or part of an HBCU, I encourage you to look at this program. We have $10 million available for it. Our Tribal Heritage Program is our oldest competitive grant program, works to do typical preservation projects, but also look at preserving unique cultural heritage and traditions. An example of this here is the Hula Society and documentation of how they teach the dance to the younger generation. So that's kind of an exciting type of preservation that we're able to do. Those grants will be opening up this fall, so keep an eye out for those. And our Save America's Treasures program is our big flagship program. Focuses on the preservation of nationally significant sites and collections. Those collections are actually managed for us by our federal agency partners, the NEH and Institute of Museum Library Services. SAT is a little bit different than our other programs. It's the only one that requires a match. And we can also only fund a project once. So once we touch a specific building or collection with one of these grants, we can't fund it again. And those are statutory rules that we really can't change right now. But there's 26 million available. These applications are open right now. They're due December 20th. And if you have a nationally significant site or collection, I encourage you to look at this. You don't necessarily have to have the match in place. You need to show us you have a good plan for raising it. And so that don't let that hold you back. But something we'd be happy to talk more about if you think you have a project that's eligible. And this is an example of Rosa Parks Bus that was funded through the collection side of the program. Our new program is the semi-quincentennial grants. This also has some very specific language from Congress. So it's focused on preserving state-owned sites and structures that are listed in the National Register and commemorate the founding of the nation. So fairly specific, has to be state-owned. It could be in a long-term lease by a nonprofit, but the ownership does have to rest with the state. We're looking at preserving sites that were established prior to December 30th, 1800. In this, we can look at commemorative sites that are also considered historic and listed. But if you have questions about this program, please do reach out to us because it's a little bit complicated. Those applications are due on December 6th, so this funding is also available right now. And lastly is our Paul Brune Historic Revitalization Grants. They're a little bit different. They're more like our Certified Local Government program. So the idea is you're applying for a grant, a sub-grant program from us. You're going to tell us if you get a block of money, how are you going to give that away to assist properties in rural communities and support economic development. So we have $10 million to give away for this. There is no match required. And what we consider a rural area is fewer than 50,000 people as defined by the census. You could decide your program only wants to give to communities under 10,000, and that's okay. But what you're telling us in your application is how you're going to award the money, monitor those grants, get the covenants and easements on them, and that type of thing. So this is a little bit different, a little bit complicated. So I'd encourage you to reach out and talk to us about it. Those applications will be opening soon. We also have several other programs within the Park Service, not managed in our shop, but if you have battlefields, Japanese sites, maritime is another program that we manage, as well as our National Repatriation Program through NAGPRA. So just a couple little tips and tricks if you're thinking about applying. Starting early is super essential. A lot of the systems that we have are complicated, especially SAM right now takes a long time to register in. So at least 4 to 6 weeks sometimes if you're not registered. So keep those things in mind. And all these things you could start right now, even if it's for a program that you're going to apply for next year. Making sure you're eligible for the grants. As you can see, there's a lot of different ones and they have a lot of different rules. So don't be afraid to reach out to us and ask about that, and making sure your project's the next logical step. We don't want to refinish your floors if you still have a hole in the roof. So that's an important thing. Making sure you're using the current application form and making sure that math works. Don't be the only set of eyes. Get someone that's not so familiar with your project to look at that application and make sure that it's kind of meeting those requirements. And you're getting the story across. So it's important to tell the story of your site. You're really selling it to the grant panel. But also remember that they read a lot of these. So keeping it concise and to the point, making sure all the information is in the application. They don't have to look at other attachments, and those things are really important. And remember that a picture is worth 1,000 words. So good photos, but bad photos, I like to call them. So we love to see a picture of your property on a sunny day and it looks beautiful. It's architecturally lovely. But if you have pictures of a hole in the roof, show us those. If you have rain pouring in, we need pictures of that. So make sure we see the bad stuff as well as the good stuff. And those pictures clearly show the work that you're asking us to do so we can understand the project, because we've never seen it before, probably. Deadlines are not just suggestions, they're real. We rarely extend deadlines. We take that midnight deadline for grants.gov seriously. That last few hours, grants.gov will slow down and your application may not get through. So make sure you start that early. Set that date a couple days earlier and just pretend like that's your deadline. That way you'll have time to fix something if things go badly. And remember, grants are a competition. So you may not get funded. And a lot of times we have, you might be your third try. And that's okay. That's how it works when it's competitive. But anytime you're not funded, even if you are funded, we want you to come and get your comments and then try again. So those comments are always available to you. You can reach out and get those. And we're happy to share them and then happy to have a conversation with you about them should you have any questions. And remember that if you're a good grantee, you might get funded again. We have several, especially our African American Civil Rights Program, that we have about 3 or 4 grants, active grants with them, some of them over $1 million at this point. So do keep that in mind. We have a lot of help on our YouTube channel, so HH Preserve It NPS, and you can look there. We have short videos that are up on most of our grant programs that talk about what's special about them, as well as some guidance on just applying for a federal grant in general. It's not the most exciting viewing, but it could be helpful to you. I'm gonna, this is just talking about timelines. You know, I think the big things are usually our grants are up on grants.gov for 60 days. We're trying to go for 90 days, so you have plenty of time. It takes us 4 months to move through a selection process. So don't plan to start your project until 6 months after the deadline. That's just kind of a rule to follow. Be prepared to be in a lot of systems. We manage grants and grant solutions. We do reimbursements through ASAP. So those are things to be aware of. And also the reporting requirements. We're going to ask for an interim report every 6 months and a final report. If we're doing physical work to a listed property, you're going to have to enter into a covenant and or easement. So don't let that be a surprise for you later. And we do have some limits on administrative costs. But that also, I would like to make one last little point on that, is a lot of y'all probably don't have the capacity to manage this grant and it seems overwhelming. But use the grant to hire that capacity. Make sure if you need to hire a consultant or bring in a part-time staff person or something to help you run that grant, do that and make that part of your budget for the grant. We can help you pay for that. We want you to be successful. So don't think of this as adding more burden onto you, but maybe it's a way to get you some support that can help you do the project and then move you ahead. I've thrown a lot of information at you. This is the best way to keep up with us, is signing up for our Steel Pig Bulletin. You can also sign up for things in grants.gov, but we always send out a notice when we've announced grants and when we award grants. So this is a great way to keep up with what's going on. And then also, if you have questions, the best place to go is our main email box, steelpig@nps.gov. We have multiple staff that monitor that every day. If they can't answer your question, they'll get it to someone on our team that can. And also our voicemail box is monitored daily. So don't think if you're sending us that, you're not going to get a response, because you are. And that is all I have. I know we have a lot of other speakers and we'll be around for questions. So I'm going to end it there. Thank y'all.
All right. Thank you, Megan. That was fantastic. You jammed a lot of information about a lot of great grant programs and the application stuff and the administration. It's really exciting to see all those opportunities. And I just want to let people know I shared a fact sheet on several of those grant programs in the chat on the side that was provided to me by Megan and Catherine. You guys can also, if Megan and Catherine, if you want to share any other links, feel free to drop those in the chat. And just a reminder, the video of this whole session will be available soon on YouTube for anyone who wants to rewatch. So thank you, Megan.
Sure. Thank you.
So we'll hold off questions. If anyone has any questions, submit them in the Q&A. We'll do those towards the end of the session, but I'm going to go ahead and introduce our next speaker, Nikki Vann. And Nikki, feel free to go ahead and load up your PowerPoint if you'd like to. Nikki Vann is the Director of Grants and Awards at the National Trust for Historic Preservation, an organization that awarded grants totaling $9.5 million in 2021 to preservation projects across the United States. Nikki joined the National Trust in 2004. She holds a bachelor's degree in history from the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill. And with that, I will turn it over to Nikki.
All right. Thank you, Michael. Thank you for having me today. It's a pleasure to be with you all. I am here to talk about the National Trust for Historic Preservation's various grant programs. And as Michael mentioned, the National Trust last year provided over $9.5 million to hundreds of preservation projects nationwide. The National Trust has been providing grants to preservation projects since 1969. But in recent years, we've really seen the number and volume, and dollar amount of our grants grow. And so there might be some programs that are new to folks who may have worked with us in the past. So I hope to go over all of those briefly today. So through various programs, the National Trust funds everything from planning to education to capacity building to brick and mortar restorations. Grants range from $2,500 to up to $250,000 for some of those larger restoration projects. And like I said, during this presentation, I'll cover the basics of the programs we offer, focusing on the 5 categories listed here. So the first program I'm going to discuss is our National Trust Preservation Fund program, which funds preservation-focused planning and education projects. The National Trust Preservation Funds are a series of endowed funds, which for the most part are geographically restricted. Through its portfolio of endowed funds, the National Trust has 2 funds dedicated to Delaware. The first is a statewide fund called the Preservation Fund for Delaware. This fund was created in 2003 with a lead gift from a private donor, and it's grown over the years through support of both individual and foundation contributions. The fund currently has $32,000 available for granting. The second fund in Delaware is the Preservation Fund for Sussex County. As the name implies, it is limited to Sussex County, to projects in Sussex County. This fund was created in 2002 using proceeds from the sale of the David Carlton Pepper Farm near Georgetown. And that fund currently has $67,000 available for granting. As you'll see on the slide, these grants range from $2,500 to $5,000. So they're small seed grants. They are part of that Preservation Fund program. So they fund preservation planning, education, and outreach projects. These are not the funds that are intended for brick and mortar work. And the funds have 3 standing deadlines annually. The next deadline coming up will be February 1st. We also have a June 1st and an October 1st deadline. We also have the ability to grant out of round in emergency situations. So if your site has something unexpected happen, something, you know, a fire happens at your site or your community, and you need a structural engineer to come and assess its viability, things along those lines. We can respond to unexpected situations and hopefully help you out. So if that ever happens, feel free to contact us. We hope it doesn't, but emergencies do happen. So just a few more. So a few more details about that program, the National Trust Preservation Fund program, which the Delaware funds are part of. Those programs are open to nonprofit organizations and public and governmental agencies. We do not accept applications from individuals or for-profit businesses. We do require a dollar-for-dollar match. That in the past has been a cash match, though now we allow either cash or in-kind contributions and donations to count towards that match. We do pay fully upfront for these smaller dollar grant programs, so you'll receive the money on the front end of the grant program or the grant project, and then you will have a year to complete the grant project and submit to us a final report recapping what happened with our funding. The image you see here is one of our recent grantees. Earlier this year, the Friends of Zor in Odessa received a $5,000 grant from the Preservation Fund for Delaware. Funds are going to be used to contract with a preservation architectural and engineering firm to study and provide a restoration plan and cost estimate for the historic Zor Methodist Episcopal Church and Social Hall. So that's a small example of the type of funding that we can provide through this program. For those of you on the call who maybe have applied to the National Trust in the past through this program and haven't looked at it in a few years, I wanted to make you aware of just a few changes that we made in response to COVID-19, in part to help organizations better sustain themselves through the pandemic. Probably the biggest change, the thing that's proved most beneficial and we're seeing people take advantage of, is we now allow staff time as an eligible expense for our nonprofit applicants. We used to limit funding to the procurement of services that your staff couldn't provide, but we now recognize both it's a recognition that the preservation field has changed substantially since 1969 when this program was started, and now a lot of organizations have on staff the expertise needed to undertake these projects. And we also wanted to, like I said, help organizations sustain themselves through this grant funding and not feel that they had to always look outside to do this work. We allow for organizational capacity building activities. That was something that we had not done in recent years, but we do again allow for. We fund ongoing projects as well as new initiatives. And we also, as I mentioned before, have loosened our match requirements. So we now allow for in-kind donations to count towards that required match, donations of goods or services. So in addition to the state-specific funds I just detailed, the Trust also has a number of national funds that may be of interest. Each of these funds are open to organizations in Delaware, as well as every other state, but each has its own set of guidelines and features that make them different from our standard grants that I just went over. So some of these funds allow for brick and mortar funding. The Joanna Favreau Fund for Historic Preservation and the Cynthia Woods Mitchell Fund for Historic Interiors can allow for brick and mortar work. These some of these funds have larger grant sizes. So while the preservation funds that were specific to Delaware cap out at 5,000, many of these funds, three of these funds can go up to 15,000. And one of them, the Jordan Fund for the Mid-Atlantic, which Delaware is considered part of, does not require a match. So these four funds are good funds to have in mind. The Cynthia Woods Mitchell Fund, as the name implies, is restricted to historic interiors, and the Hart Family Fund for Small Towns is restricted to projects taking place in towns that have a population of 10,000 people or fewer. The photo you see here is another example of a Delaware funded project. So the National Trust awarded $3,000 to the Delaware Division of Historical and Cultural Affairs from the Henry Jordan Fund for the Mid-Atlantic. Funds were provided to help the state better engage the area's descendant communities in their decision-making process around this site. So these are just some general criteria that we use for evaluating grantees across all of our programs. We, of course, consider the significance of the project or the resource that will be impacted by our funding. We look at the degree to which the project fits current National Trust priorities. And if we have specific priorities that we are focusing on, we will be sure to detail those in our guidelines. I haven't detailed them here because they will shift from time to time, but just know that you should give our guidelines a fresh read every time you're applying to make sure that we haven't shifted any funding priorities. We look at the organizational capacity as demonstrated in the application. We look at the likelihood that the project will be completed as described, the feasibility of the timeline and budget, and then the long-term impacts of the project. So those are just general criteria we look at across all our programs. And I think that many of the tips that Megan gave for her program, good photos, a detailed budget that makes sense, make sure that you're explaining your project, don't assume that we know the site. Those are all tips that I think are universal probably to all the funders on this call. So I thank her for laying those out. That was helpful. So those programs that I just detailed are programs that have, like I said, have been around for several years. 1969 is when we started doing this type of work. But in recent years, the National Trust has taken on a few additional grant programs that can fund larger grant amounts. And so I'm going to go over a few of those here. One that you may have heard of is the African American Cultural Heritage Action Fund. And this program is a preservation campaign to preserve and protect places that have been overlooked in American history and represent centuries of African American activism, achievement, and resilience. Since launching the African American Cultural Heritage Action Fund in 2017, the National Trust has awarded $12.4 million for African American history, supporting the preservation of 160 places to date across the country. This highly competitive grant supports a range of preservation activities, including capital projects, organizational capacity building activities, preservation planning, and programming and interpretation. Within the overall program, there are specific initiatives to fund Black churches, historically Black colleges and universities, and modernist sites designed by Black architects. We are still finalizing deadlines for this year, for the program for this year, though we anticipate launching our letter of intent process in mid-November. So I will provide information at the end of this about our website where you can go to learn more information. Another larger national fund that we have at the moment is the National Fund for Sacred Places. This program was established in 2016 to provide technical and financial support for congregations by building the capacity and increasing the stability of these critical yet disappearing historic community centers. A collaborative program of the Partners for Sacred Places and the National Trust for Historic Preservation, the National Fund is supported by $20 million from the Indiana-based Lilly Endowment. To date, more than $9 million has been awarded to 81 sacred places, representing 23 faith traditions in 35 states and the District of Columbia. Grants range from $50,000 to $250,000 and require the congregation raise a match for these funds. In 2023, the LOI process will open on January 11th, and letters of intent are due February 24th. To learn more about the program, this program has a standalone site separate. The information is on the National Trust site, but it also has its own standalone site, which I've listed here. It's fundforsacredplaces.org. And while I have you here, I also wanted to note one of our non-grant related deadlines. I hope that's okay. That is coming up. So the National Trust is currently accepting nominations for our 11 most endangered places list. Since 1988, the National Trust has published an annual list of America's 11 most endangered historic places to raise awareness about the threats facing some of our nation's greatest treasures. The list, which has identified more than 300 sites to date, has been so successful in galvanizing preservation efforts that less than 5% of these sites have been lost. So we are, as I said, currently accepting nominations. The process is an initial letter of intent stating some broad details about the site, and those that we are interested in including will be asked to submit a fuller nomination form. This year, we do have 2 focus areas. The first is a focus on sites that have been impacted by climate change, natural disasters, flooding, wildfires, a broad range of climate change issues. And then we're also encouraging nominations of historic places that are important to communities who are historically underrepresented within preservation. So the programs I've highlighted today are either endowed funds that we will award each year, or they're funds that we currently have multiple years of guaranteed funding to support. But in addition, the National Trust works with both corporate, philanthropic, and federal partners to offer funding opportunities to meet the needs of the preservation field. Recent funding partnerships have included our relationship with American Express to support historic small restaurants as they weathered the pandemic, and another pandemic-related funding partnership with the National Endowment for the Humanities to support organizations working to tell the history of underrepresented communities at their site. These funds may be one-time opportunities, so we encourage people to sign up for our grant interest list to stay in the loop so you don't miss an opportunity. We always hope to continue programs that we start, but there's never a guarantee. So to stay in the loop, we encourage you to go to our website, which is listed here. And on that site, there is an area where you can sign up for a grant interest list. I don't think we're excessive in the messages we send, but it will make sure that you're aware of any new programs or upcoming deadlines. And if you have any questions about the grant program, all of our guidelines are listed on this site, more details about everything that I mentioned here. But if you have specific questions, the best way to reach us is by our email address, which is grants@savingplaces.org. So thank you for your time, and I look forward to your questions in the Q&A.
Excuse me. Thank you, Nikki, for that wonderful presentation. And again, I'm really blown away at the amount of opportunities that are out there. And who knew, 2 grants that are available only for the state of Delaware.
Yes, and I will note that those 2 grants, we are undersubscribed in them. We are not receiving the number of applications to the demand. The demand doesn't meet the amount available. So if anybody on this call at all perked up at that opportunity, please contact us.
So hint, hint, money here for the taking, right?
Yes.
All right, thank you. So if anyone has any questions for Nikki, go ahead and submit them in the Q&A, and we'll circle back during that Q&A session at the end of this. And Nikki, feel free to post any links you want to in the chat if you have any other additional information you want to share or links for people. in that. So thank you. Our next speaker is Jeremy Rothwell. And Jeremy earned his BA in Political Science and History from Washington College and an MA in Urban Affairs and Regional Planning, and a graduate certificate in Historic Preservation, all from the University of Delaware. He is currently a planner for the town of Smyrna, and he serves as the vice president of the Delaware Preservation Fund, secretary of Preservation Delaware, and as an appointed member of the Delaware State Review Board. So very active in lots of preservation organizations here within the state. So with that, I will pull up Jeremy's PowerPoint. Can you guys see that okay?
Okay, thank you, Michael. I appreciate that. And again, I'm Jeremy Rothwell. I get to wear many hats. I serve as the vice president of the Delaware Preservation Fund. Our president, Kate Morrissey, I know is one of the participants here. I know she's on the call or on the Zoom, so we certainly appreciate all of her support. But we have a 10-member board of directors from all over the state, from all 3 counties. A good range of architectural historians, people who work in local government. We have state representatives, well, it's the state agencies, and we do have a part-time executive director. For those of you that don't know, the Delaware Preservation Fund was created by PDI back in 2000, and it was given a significant amount of seed funding from both the Delaware General Assembly, along with Foundation and the Welfare Foundation. And this seed funding and endowment has allowed us to provide grants to individual property owners and nonprofits for the restoration and rehabilitation of historic buildings. In this past fiscal year, I believe was, throughout our 22-year history was, I believe, our biggest year ever. We were able to give $82,000 worth of grant awards. And this was, I really want to do a shout out to the Division of Historical and Cultural Affairs and Tim Slavin personally for providing a very significant contribution to our preservation fund, which allowed us to more than double essentially the amount of awards we were able to give away this year. And we really appreciate that support. Next slide, Michael. Okay, so just get into the basic eligibility here. So it has to be individually listed on the National Register, or it has to be a contributing element, or excuse me, a contributing resource in a National Register district. This past year, we added a third to be determined by a state, county, or local government to be locally significant. And essentially, we wanted to. This is really for your, given that we have National Register districts in almost all of our towns. This was to allow rural properties, and we have many rural structures throughout the countryside who do not have, who may have never been surveyed before. And this would allow the applicant to have a determination made whether or not it would be eligible or considered significant and eligible for the program. Next slide, Michael. Okay, so for the grant requirements, in past years, this was, and we have completely, if you've participated in the program in the past, I would ask that we pay attention, because this program and this grant program has changed fairly significantly in the past 2 years. We've tried to rework it to make it more efficient and a little bit more broader in scope. In past years, it was really just for capital bricks and mortars for the rehabilitation of historic buildings, structures, and resources. We have added to that, and one of the reasons we added to it was that we get what's called grant and aid funding from the state of Delaware. Grant and aid funding is we're very grateful for the support. However, it does prohibit the use for capital projects. So we have to find ways and non-capital related to be able to spend money. So for us to be able to do that, we've opened it up to planning projects, whether it's a restoration plan for a building or for a resource, preparing an individual listing or amending an existing NR district, or expanding an NR district. And we have many of those out there. And I know there's a great deal of interest in all those things. We also open it up to archaeological documentation and also for interpretive signage or interpretive planning. So in terms of this past year, since we've opened this up, We have funded planning projects. We haven't funded some of the other ones that we have shown here, but we certainly welcome those applications in the future for the upcoming year. Next slide, Michael. Okay, so we have a maximum grant award of $10,000 or 50% of the project cost, whichever is less. And this is new. Typically in past years, this was a much smaller amount. Oftentimes they would only fund $1,000 to $2,000. We've tried to up it so that it's a greater puzzle piece for property owners and for developers to be able to use. We do allow in-kind contributions. All construction, if this is a capital bricks and mortar project, it must adhere to the Secretary of the Interior standards. Just no different than a tax credit project. It must be completed within 1 year, although we do permit a 1-year extension. Next slide. Okay, so this our upcoming round. This past year we actually did 2 rounds, but which was unusual. I don't believe we've ever done 2 rounds, but we're getting back to our 1 round a year. And it will be opening up here in the next couple of weeks. We want to allow additional time for applicants to be able to prepare their application. We are asking for additional information. So it will close on Friday, February the 3rd. So we want to give you at least 3 months to be able to prepare your applications. The board of directors for the DPF, we plan on reviewing them in April and hopefully being able to issue grant awards by the end of April or early May. All the grants, the applications can be done through PDI's website, which I've listed. And I encourage you, once this the new round is up here in the next couple of weeks, we can send something out to our constant contact. Next slide. Okay. So what we're asking for, one of the, we've always asked for a narrative of the scope of the work. One of the things we need, and we've realized, especially for giving more money, is cost estimates, and specifically proposals from contractors, if at all possible. This allows us to actually gauge, for one, the actual scope of the project and understand everything that's going to be done to this building or the resource. And it helps us get a better understanding as to whether or not and how the Secretary of the Interior standards would be met, which is a requirement for the property. We've always required photos. We are asking for either a copy or access to the National Register listing or the district. And if you are, this is new, if you are not listed, a letter of determination from a qualified architectural historian that the board would be able to vet. Next slide. So I think it's my last slide. So in terms of what we're going to be using in order to vet all of the this upcoming funding. So obviously the award of the grants, how many grants we give, and the size of each individual grant is going to be based upon how many funds we have. So for instance, is the Division of Historical and Cultural Affairs going to provide another contribution? What is our grant made going to be for this particular year? All of these things come into play. Historical significance, is this a run-of-the-mill vernacular piece of architecture, or is this a landmark property? The degree into which it's otherwise threatened. We aim as an issue of fairness to distribute grant awards to all 3 counties and the city of Wilmington across the state for basic fairness. And the ability of the applicant to complete the project. Again, it has to be completed within a year. We want to see that the applicant is far enough along, and that's one of the reasons we're asking for quotes from contractors. While we do give preference to first-time applicants, we will consider repeat funds, based on a case-by-case basis, based upon the significance of the project. If it's a multi-phase project. And it's some of the other things that we are looking at. Is it open to the public? Whether it's a public building, is it owned by a nonprofit, or is it open to the public as a commercial building? So those are all some of the things that we're considering when we award and select applicants. So with that, I appreciate everyone's time. Michael.
Great. Thank you, Jeremy, for that great overview of the Delaware Preservation Fund programming. And I think that's a a pot of money that, while not gigantic grants, can really help a lot of different people do historic preservation work on their Delaware properties. So I'm glad that you're getting the word out, and I assume we have some information or links in the chat, or if not, we will get some in the chat here shortly. So thank you, Jeremy, for your time. And if you have any questions for Jeremy about the Delaware Preservation Fund, please submit them via the Q&A function. So our next presenters are Emily Whaley and Kara Briggs. And feel free, guys, if you want to go ahead and share your screen and start setting up your presentation. Emily Whaley is an architectural historian with the Delaware Division of Historical and Cultural Affairs, the State Historic Preservation Office. Whaley earned a BA in Historic Preservation from the University of Mary Washington, and her responsibilities at the division include reviewing nominations and project proposals for the National Register of Historic Places, historic preservation tax credits, consulting with federal, state, and local agencies and applicants on proposed construction projects, and many more. Kara Briggs is an architectural historian, also with the Delaware Division of Historical and Cultural Affairs Preservation Office, where she serves as the manager of the State Historic Preservation Tax Credit Program. Kara holds a master's degree in urban affairs and public policy with a concentration in historic preservation from the University of Delaware, where she also earned certificates in museum studies and human subjects training. She holds a bachelor's degree in interior design from the Savannah College of Art and Design. And with that, I will turn it over to you.
And I was muted, sorry. Thank you so much. As Michael said, I'm Kara Briggs, and I manage both the federal and state historic preservation tax credit programs for the state of Delaware's Division of Historical and Cultural Affairs.
And I'm Emily Whaley, and I'm an architectural historian with the Delaware Division of Historical and Cultural Affairs, and I assist Kara with the tax credit program.
There are a multitude of benefits to both the state and federal programs, some of which include encouraging the preservation of historic buildings, encourage reuse of previously vacant buildings, stimulate the local economy, and allow rehabilitation projects to be economically viable.
And there are fine differences to each the state and the federal programs, but both maintain the primary function of investment in the appropriate rehabilitation and reuse of historic buildings.
Established in 1976, the Federal Historic Preservation Tax Credit Program offers a tax credit equal to a percentage of the construction and project costs associated with the rehabilitation of a certified historic property. There's a 20% credit for income-producing depreciable buildings. There's no limit on the amount of tax credits assigned each year, and tax credits applied against federal income tax liability.
The Delaware Historic Preservation Tax Credit Program was created by state legislation in 2001 and renewed by legislative action in 2010, and it has been amended several times since then. The program is currently authorized through fiscal year 2030.
This program repeatedly proves to be highly successful in promoting the rehabilitation of historic properties throughout the state. Each fiscal year, $8 million in tax credits are made available to owners of historically significant properties. The State Historic Preservation Tax Credit Program offers a tax credit award that is calculated as a percentage of the qualified expenditures for the project, adjusted for any other applicable criteria as outlined in program guidance. For example, there's a 20% credit for income producing or depreciable buildings, a 30% credit for owner occupied residential buildings, and a 30% credit for income producing buildings committed to low income housing. Since the creation of the state program in 2001 through fiscal year 2021, over 93.5 million in tax credits have been awarded to more than 300 properties, leveraging over 416 million in investment.
So now we'd like to take a moment and take a break from the facts and figures to share with you some before and after examples of properties that have benefited from the use of historic tax credits. Our first example is at 48 North Walnut Street in Milford. On the left-hand side of the screen, we have a historic photo of the property from the 1920s. On the right, we have a photo of the property prior to its rehabilitation. Here's a photo of 48 North Walnut Street after rehabilitation. Rehabilitation included the repair of historic windows, structural work, and the rehabilitation of the historic storefront. This project was a recipient of state and federal tax credits. Moving upstate, our next example is at 2 East 7th Street in Wilmington. On the left, again, you can see a historic photo of the property, and on the right-hand side of the screen, you'll see a photo of the building prior to its rehabilitation. Here's a photo of 2 East 7th Street after rehabilitation. Rehabilitation included the replacement of the turret and commercial and residential fit-out, among other things. This project was a recipient of state and federal tax credits as well.
So who qualifies for the federal program? Any person with income tax liability, including individual property owners, corporations, renters, or leaseholders, with some conditions and consent of the property owner. And I will note, when I'm saying individual property owners, this does not include a residence or a homeowner. These properties only qualify for the state program.
So you might be wondering who qualifies for Delaware's program. Any person with income tax liability, including individual property owners, corporations, renters or leaseholders with some conditions and consent from the property owner, and nonprofit organizations. This includes churches.
So to be eligible, a property must be a certified historic property. And what is that? Well, that is one that is either individually listed in the National Register of Historic Places or located in a National Register Historic District and certified as contributing to the significance of that district, or that the property is located in a locally recognized historic district and certified as contributing to the significance of that district.
Eligible properties must be determined to be a certified rehabilitation. This means that the Secretary of Interior standards for rehabilitation, which in brief exist to protect a property's integrity and character-defining features, must be followed in the proposed work. In a federal application, the expenditures or cost of rehabilitation must exceed the pre-rehabilitation cost of the building. Generally, this test must be met within 2 years or within 5 years for a project completed in multiple phases. The cost of the project must exceed the greater of $5,000 or the building's adjusted basis. The following formula will help you determine if your project will be substantial. The purchase price of the property, including the building and land, subtracted by the cost of the land at the time of purchase, subtracted by the depreciation taken for an income-producing property, added to the cost of any capital improvements made since the purchase, will equal to the adjusted basis. Applicants who only qualify for Delaware's tax credit program, such as homeowners or nonprofits, must meet certain minimum expenditures of $5,000.
The Secretary of Interior's standards and guidelines for rehabilitation are 10 common sense principles and supporting guidance which promote consistent preservation practices, allow for repair or alteration for contemporary use, and promote repair of historic features in order to retain character. These standards are the guidelines and the Bible, if you will, of how these projects are governed and determined by.
Qualified expenditures are the cost associated with the rehabilitation of the project. To simplify the explanation, these are the costs of anything that is nailed down or used for this project. For example, you may claim cost of the rental of construction equipment, but you may not claim the cost of purchase of equipment. Another way to think of this is to imagine that you could pick the property up, flip it upside down, and give it a good shake. Whatever falls out of the building, such as an area rug or an appliance, would not be a qualified expenditure. Whatever stays in place, like wall-to-wall carpeting or windows, would typically be considered a qualifying expenditure.
There are a multitude of parts of these applications. For the state and federal application, there's a part 1, certifying the historic property and its eligibility to take part in the program. The part 2, which is the certification of rehabilitation, is essentially your proposal of work. All of the things that were mentioned previously by other presenters today about don't make no assumptions, spell it out, let's see the pictures. So if you're coming to this program because your building needs a new roof, we would like to see the building as it looks in whole, and also where are the problem areas. These photos will be, this section of the application truly is the whole before package of the application. The part 3, the certification of completion, is just that, the end of the project. You will then be submitting all of the work that had to do with the project, your contractor's receipts, and any of the after photos, so they can be compared side by side with the before. So at the end of the process, there is a full story of what has happened to the building in this program. So for the federal, you'll see that it's composed mainly of the part 1, part 2, and part 3. But for the state, there's a 4th component, and that is the request for credit. If all of the expenditures as provided within the part 3, if they are determined to truly be qualified costs, and then the credit award is determined based on those costs, you will receive your credit award. Both the federal and state applications are reviewed by Emily and myself through the Delaware Division of Historical and Cultural Affairs, and final approval of any of the federal applications is through our counterparts at Technical Preservation Services within the National Park Service.
So you might be wondering what kind of help is available. Kara and I are both available to provide assistance on how to define the character of your home or property, advice in determining the project work, or if the project work will be consistent with the standards, guidance on the appropriate rehabilitation treatment options available, assistance in completing the historic preservation tax credit application, and we can also provide information on the financial aspects of the program that may be of interest to you.
So we're providing here some various web-based rehab guidance. So feel free to take a look, and I'm happy to provide these later if anybody would like these. And this is a slide to give you our contact information. You can speak either with Emily or myself, and we are happy to hold hands if need be and walk you through the process. We have been known to do that. So no question is a silly one. So Michael, I'll turn it back over to you unless anyone has any questions.
Okay, yeah. Thank you, Kara and Emily, for all that information about the tax credit program. I think a lot of people don't realize just how financially beneficial those tax credits can be and how much that can help promote historic preservation in Delaware. So thank you for sharing the basics there and making yourselves available for questions. We do have quite a few questions that have rolled in for yourselves and other panelists. So I'll go ahead and start those if all the panelists want to jump on. So the first question is for Nikki. And it says, we have a number of historic African-American churches in Delaware, many of which are in need of historic preservation. So can you speak a little bit more about that particular fund, the African-American Cultural Heritage Action Fund, and relatedly, do they have to be on the National Register to be eligible for that program?
So I'm trying not to confuse things. For Black churches, there are a number of funds you could apply for. The probably marquee fund around that resource is our Black Churches Preservation Fund. It is part of the African American Cultural Heritage Action Fund program. That fund, actually, we just launched it this year also with support of the Lilly Endowment, and we are in the process of reviewing applications to that fund at the moment. and we anticipate having another grant round for that fund around this time next year. But if you missed out on applying for that, the General Action Fund grant program can also fund Black churches and the preservation work being done there. And that's the program that is opening in November. It's not specific to Black churches, but Black churches may apply. We also have the Fund for Sacred Places, where if there's an active congregation involved with the Black church, they can apply to that program as well. And then if planning work needs to be done, smaller grants, of course, those two Delaware preservation funds I talked about. So the Black churches specific initiative is new to the trust, and it was very popular. We got a lot of demand for that one. But if you applied or if you didn't, you missed it, just know that there are other opportunities for funding of that resource type. And again, feel free to reach out to us because our deadlines are, we try to keep them consistent, but we're happy to get on our interest list so that you can always be aware of what's happening. But we're happy to help you figure out which fund is the best fund for you to apply for.
Great, thank you. For this next one, I'm going to combine one of the questions in the Q&A with another question that was submitted. So Jeremy, as far as Delaware Preservation Fund, what makes an application more successful or less successful for that matter? Do you have any tips for like the common problems you see? And then after Jeremy responds, I'd love to combine that because we did get other questions just about the biggest challenges or obstacles that keep people from getting grants. So I'd like other panels to weigh in if they can about their own programs, about what they see as the most common obstacles and best tips.
Sure, Michael. So, we have a pretty diverse board and from all over the state. So the good thing is we get to, we know many of the projects out there, when they're coming before us, but as much information as can be provided is very, very helpful. Sometimes when we get grant applications, we get very little information. We get a couple of sentences in terms of what they're doing, and then we're left to guess in terms of what's being proposed. If we don't know exactly what's being done, or if the Secretary of the Interior standards are going to be followed, then we do err on the side of caution, or we ask for additional information. I think that in the past 2 years, we have the larger grant awards that we've given, the ones that actually get up to the $10,000 level, are for your larger, for one, projects of greater historical significance, and that are open to the public in some form or fashion. So is it a public building, whether that be a school or a church? Is it a commercial building where the public is coming in and out? Or is it some sort of museum? So I think those are what's going to bring it up to the top. So in terms of some of the other things that, we have shied away from, we don't want to be in a position of just funding routine maintenance. I know in some years past, many of the projects were, because there were smaller awards of $1,000 to $2,000, there's limited amount that you can do for $1,000 to $2,000. So I think we're gearing more towards larger projects that can be completed and have a reasonable degree of being completed, that are historically significant. So hopefully that is a little bit more guidance.
Yeah, and do any of the other panelists want to weigh in from their perspectives about like the number one tips they have, or number one problem they see people run into that prevents them from getting funding?
Michael, I'd be happy to chime in a little bit. Or actually, I'm going to let Catherine chime in because she's the one that works with folks to redo those applications. So Catherine.
Well, and feel free to speak after me, Megan. I'm Catherine. I do grant outreach for state, tribal, local plans and grants, the competitive grants that Megan talked about, which we have. And just around that question, I mean, there probably are a number of items that come to mind, but I think overall, I think that one important thing that we always say is, just how you tell that story, how just being clear about it, being clear and concise in your explanation, following the instructions instead of like, going rogue on a grant application is really important. Having an outside reader that doesn't know your project, doesn't know a thing about your budget or at all, have them look it over, have them read it and point out anything that needs to be added or omitted. I think that's really, really an important thing to do, and just making sure your I's are dotted and your T's are crossed. And then just, double checking your budgets. If there's more than one budget that's needed, just making sure that, whether it's a budget narrative along with a numbers budget, that they just align perfectly so that there are no red flags around them. You have anything else, Megan?
I think that's good. Two things that often come up in our grant panels are timeline, and that as you're asked to provide a timeline, we usually ask for that it's realistic. So don't think that because you are going to hurry and try to get that project done in like half the time it should take, that's not a good thing. So definitely, and keep in mind when you use months and dates, you don't know when you're going to get the grant. So, being like in the first year, this is what we plan to accomplish. In the second year, that's always a good thing. So that seems to always come up with the panelists. And in addition to that, what is your plan for maintaining that property after we fund it? So what's going to happen next? Like, we've given you this money, we've gotten it in shape. Is there a maintenance plan? Is there a budget to go along with that? What's the future going to look like? Because it's that sustainability piece that I think they're kind of wondering, is this going to be a good investment for us? So those are two things that I always see.
Great. Anyone else want to weigh in with any key advice?
I can. From our end, one thing we see, particularly for our larger grant programs where people can ask for capital expenditures, we see a lot of people submitting without having done any planning work and or properly explaining why they're taking the steps that they are proposing to take for their building. So that's where our smaller grants and those planning dollars can really be useful, because it can help position people better when we do have bigger opportunities to come to us and have the planning already done. So we know that what they're proposing makes sense for their project. I think the timeline piece is a really key point, Megan. We see that a lot too. People will apply and say that their project's going to start 2 weeks later and will be done by the time we make decisions. It's not helpful for us. And then we also, people will often apply, and I think that they don't give any backup for why they're putting budget numbers in. And so they might be, trying to ballpark what a very expensive restoration project might cost, and without mentioning if they've gotten quotes or have done anything that makes this a real budget. So that always just raises questions in reviewers' minds.
Great, thank you. Anyone else have any other tips or things to avoid?
If I could chime in, our application, as we were going over in the presentation, it's broken up into different parts, and each part, it is spelled out what you need to do, what box you're supposed to be checking off. So asking for the backup documentation, how did you come to this figure that you're saying it's going to cost? Let us see those documents. But I think the biggest hang up is the no prior work rule. With the state program, that's a hard and fast one. When you come to us with an application, do not start any work until your part 2 is signed, certified, and we've been able to give it back to you.
Sounds like.
And I would just add to what Kara mentioned, that if you have questions about the application when you're going through it, don't be afraid to reach out to Kara or myself. We're here to answer your questions and provide help, because ultimately at the end of the day, we want to help with the rehabilitation of the buildings.
Now, I'm just going to piggyback on that paying for things that already happened. That's part of the grant process too. So we can't go back and fund something. The only way we might be able to is if you had to like go in and emergency do stabilization. So yeah, don't ask us for something retroactive. You'll need to go through our compliance review and those kinds of things before you'll start work, and allowing time for that is important. We don't turn around those reviews in 48 hours, unfortunately. So it takes a little bit.
So what I'm gathering from all of you is they should communicate early and make sure they have all the best guidance and information as early as possible in the process. So that's, I think, pretty valuable to keep in mind. Couple more questions here, and if there's any other Q&As anyone wants to submit here, our panelists have generously agreed to be here till 2:30. We did have one for specifically Karen Emily on the state tax credits, just about eligibility. Just for clarification, if a property has to be listed on the National Register, and can historic resources be eligible if they're determined eligible but not listed? Or is there any other way besides just National Register listing that properties can be eligible for state tax credits?
Sure. So if a property is located within a National Register listed district, or if a property is noted as contributing to a locally recognized historic district, it doesn't have to just be an individually listed building, as long as it's contributing to a district. And with our program, we have had buildings that were located outside of a district, not individually listed, but the towns in which they were located in were able to provide documentation that said, you know, this building is significant to us. And that is, it's part of the Part 1 form. The Part 1 form being, you know, can you participate? And there's a series of boxes, and one of the last ones is this building locally designated landmark that is either individually eligible for listing in the National Register, and then you would have to back that up.
Yeah, thank you. And Nikki, I see you made a comment, maybe wanted to throw out some clarification of your own as far as National Register and eligibility for your grant programs.
Yeah, that was part of the question about Black churches. We do not require National Register listing as for any of our grant programs.
Thank you.
Michael, I'll just jump in here on that because ours are a bit different. So just make sure you figure out what the requirements for that program are. So like for Save America's Treasures, you have to be listed at the time of application as a National Historic Landmark or at the national level of significance in the National Register. But our African American Civil Rights program, you can either be listed and not necessarily for civil rights, or determined eligible for listing for civil rights. So if you have questions about what your eligibility is, your state office is usually the first place to kind of go, but go early. Don't go to them 2 days before the grants are due and ask them to be helping you with that, because we do ask for some backup information on those things. So that's really an important piece. So I would actually start there. That would be the first thing I would do, is to make sure you're meeting that eligibility requirement.
And Michael, I just want to add to what Megan said. For some of those programs where we do require a specific either amendment so that they're eligible, or potentially a new listing if they're eligible, that she may have said this in her presentation, but that it can be funded in the budget for the actual grant itself. So it's a wonderful way to continue to increase that percentage slide she showed of properties that are equal rights properties of any kind on the National Register.
Great, thank you. All right. This is a question from me. From your perspectives as grant givers or administrators, at least, where do you think the biggest needs are for funding? In other words, what are things you feel like you can't give money to that you know the need is there? As advocates, and I know we have advocates on the seminar today, where do we need to press for more support for historic preservation that you unfortunately cannot support, but you see the need? Any of you?
I'll jump in there. I think one of the reasons our Paul Brune program is so competitive is it is just straightforward local or state significant preservation projects. So it's just the downtown buildings, the historic courthouse, the city hall, the theater, those types of things. That is the only program we have, apart from the CLG funding that comes through the states, that does that. The rest of our programs are pretty tied to African American civil rights or history of equal rights or semi-coincidental. There's a lot of kind of parameters for those. So just that simple, straight up local preservation project is sometimes a hard thing for us to help with, and that can be kind of frustrating for us. But I think if, at some point, if the money to the states increase, the money to the CLGs increases. So that's a place to see that. And of course, Paul Brune has done that pretty successfully. But there's a lot of places out there like that. And sometimes we can't help them. So.
Great, thank you. Anyone else have any thoughts about that or see needs that they are not able to respond to in their current positions or programs?
Yeah, we see, or we get a lot of requests or questions about general operating support, or just support for organizations themselves that are doing this work, not necessarily for a specific building. And some of our programs do allow for that, and we are trying to be more flexible around that. But I think that there's a need to support the field as well as supporting the structures.
That makes a lot of sense. Anyone else want to weigh in with anything there?
Michael, I would say one thing in terms of, and I serve a couple different roles, but the in my work, not just with the preservation fund, but I think once you go below the canal in your rural small towns across the state, I think finding property owners and contractors and developers who know how to use and governments who know how to utilize some of these programs can be challenging and can be daunting. I think that there's a lot of, your larger communities, I think, are becoming more proficient, know how to use a lot of these programs. Most of the tax credits programs, a lot of them are in the city of Wilmington because the developers there know how to use them. There's a lot of hand holding that has to occur in a rural community to get them to apply. And a lot of our rural governments and small towns don't have the capacity, don't have a grant writer on staff or something like that. So they're doing grant writing in addition to 20 other things, which can be a challenge, of course.
Sure.
I would support Jeremy in that. I would say capacity for smaller nonprofit organizations to really understand how to go about raising funds for these projects that sometimes even speak a real different language than what they know. It breaks my heart as to what a struggle that is for them at the beginning and this learning curve around it. Some of them are incredibly successful, but Nikki knows from previous years of work with the trust that I really think it's a very, very important piece of what we do in historic preservation, and that I see that bleeding over into other aspects of a community even after that project's finished.
I think that's a great point. Well, you guys have all really helped get the word out, and I assume we have people from various organizations, and you guys are helping get the information out there to people. That's the first step. So we have one other question that was submitted, which I can answer very quickly and shortly, which is good because we're right up against the end time here with the clock. But someone asked, saying you guys had so much fantastic information on your slides available. Can we make those slides available? Which we can, because this is a recorded session, and this video will be made available very soon on YouTube, on the Preservation Delaware YouTube channel. So you can go through and not only see all the information on all of the slides, but the commentary each of our panelists shared with those slides. So watch for that to be posted very quickly, and all that is available. But I'm sure any of these panelists would be happy to answer your questions on anything specific that isn't covered on those slides. So please do reach out to them if you've got preservation funding needs and think any of these programs could help you. So with that, I want to go ahead and wrap up. This has been fantastic. Thank you so much to our panelists for spending their Friday afternoon with us to generously share so much fantastic information about preservation funding opportunities. It could really help a lot of people in Delaware, I'm sure. I've learned quite a bit in this session, and so very, very helpful. And I hope to see some of you tonight at the event at the Couch Diet Mills. And with that, I think I will turn it over to Alex to close this out.
Thanks, Michael, for moderating, and thank you again to all of our panelists. This is fantastic information, and I hope it helps some folks in Delaware to apply and secure some of this funding that's available. So I'll just say we are almost at the end of the virtual part of our conference. We have our last session coming up in about 15 minutes here at 2:45. So we have some current exhibitions at Winter. So I hope you can join us at 3 o'clock. We'll close this Zoom room now just to let our next panelists log in and get settled. But you can use the same link to access the session at 3 that you used to get into this session. So again, thank you so much to all of our panelists, to Michael, our moderator, and to you all for attending, and we hope to see you at 3 o'clock. Thanks so much.